It's been very busy because on one hand I have at least 6 businesses, and I also have 3 kids. So like the balance between work and kids is intense, but I enjoy it a lot. Almost 10 years ago, I was I started traveling a lot to to Tokyo, to Japan. So then during these trips, I actually found a coffee shop that you might know. It's called Fuglen Coffee. And what I loved so much about Fuglen was that it is basically a bar from Oslo that has moved to Tokyo. But when you came there, and the life I experienced was that in one hand it was very familiar, like I could recognize the coffee profile, the pastries, and even the interiors. However, the way it was actually delivered was so different, because it was Japanese people delivering a Scandinavian concept. And I think it was such an interesting idea that it has been sitting in my head all the time. Like this thing that you actually export something from Scandinavia to Asia. And I didn't go to Seoul before 2 years ago, where I cooked a dinner doing freeze. And what was so interesting was like immediately when I came to Seoul, I experienced like a very deep kinship, or like with the people from Seoul. In Seoul, you can communicate with people really well. And something that really struck me was that the Korean people are super open. Like they communicate, they are playful, they like to drink, they like to eat. For this experience, I was like, this is such an interesting place, Seoul. I haven't been to Busan and all. Like, I'm sure it's a beautiful country, but I was just like, there's something like happening here, which is so interesting. And at the same time, I also sort of felt like, as a Westerner, the way I saw, the I don't know what we should call it, like the Western Asian society, because I think there's like different Asian sort of like constellations. But I always sort of like looked at Japanese culture, I looked at Japanese art, Japanese cooking, and how should I put it, like exactly. No, but I just felt like my orientation was always towards Japan, and I think you can compare this in some way when you look at like Western culture. Everyone looks at America. It's Walt Disney. It's or like at the moment, it's like very present. Like this is the core of the Western culture. Even for myself, growing up with Converse and Nike and Disney, and then I was actually thinking that how did this actually affect me as a Danish person? Because when you grow up in Copenhagen, so when I was young, Copenhagen was like a small city. We had like a limited restaurant scene, we had a limited art scene. So like for my generation, we all grew up, we had to travel. We had to go to Paris, New York, London. I worked 2 years in London, I worked 1 year in Paris, or like outside Paris, to learn. And then we brought back the learning, and then we transformed the learning to our own language. And this has happened, about, like, you did the Copenhagen magazine, about Noma, about Olafur Eliassen, about Bjarke Ingels, and I could continue, like, all these sort of like minds that comes from a small community that suggests like a new idea to the world. And I feel Seoul is kind of the same. Maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like in some way this thing of having coming from like a hardworking community that all of a sudden blooms, and then like the culture blooms. So also like the mindset of the people of Korea is like they are actually open. They're thinking like, what's going on here? What's going on here? It's very interesting. So I feel a kinship this way. Copenhagen is a city of like 800,000 people. And I think Seoul is what, like 20 million or something. So it's a big difference, right? But I feel where I can relate is that when you come to Denmark, you come into my restaurant and then you're like, hey, I'm from Seoul. I'm gonna be like, that's cool. What are you doing tonight? What are you doing tomorrow? You should go to this restaurant. You should go to this museum. You should meet these people. And I actually have the same feeling in Seoul. Like, you know, I feel already now I have a big community. I have friends at Wild Dog. I have Olemus. I have photographers and musicians. And, you know, it's open. And I think this is where we compare as being friendly and hosting. We start with food. Okay, number one is Alain Passard. Alain Passard is a chef from Paris who used to have a 3 Michelin star restaurant, only cooking meat. Then mad cow disease came, and then he changed to make only vegetarian food. And I feel like, from my point of view, working with food is like super disciplinary and almost like being in the army. And sometimes it feels more like a discipline than an art. And I feel like being a chef, looking at Alain Passard, he gave me some sort of like hope, because he cooks with the heart, and he does it. You know, he has this sort of like relaxed approach to cooking, but also like a mind, an artistic mind. On art, there's a Thai artist called Riekrit Siavanija, and Riekrit was important for me because I gave up cooking from like a few years and I started working with food. And Riekrit, I don't know him personally at all, but I think what I saw with him was that he has a style of making art where he uses food as the, how could you say, as his language, or part of his language. I think as him being Thai, you know, he's so connected with the thing of cooking. But it was not only the cooking, it was also the aesthetics. So, you know, he has an art piece where he has like, you know, a canoe with burners inside and big pots where, you know, there's a stew inside. And he kind of uses the language of Donald Judd, of Joseph Beuys, like sort of like he adapts it into his own culture and suggests a new culture. But food, and even like, I think his first art piece was cooking in a flat in New York in 1991, where he cooked pad thai, and he left everything afterward. But I think, again, like seeing an artist working with food and actually changing, or like cutting down the borders between it, inspired me a lot and made me want to go back to food, to cook with a new heart. So like earlier, I think I understood cooking as sort of like I would compare myself to all other chefs. After looking at Rickrit, I was like, I compare to no one. I just do what I want to do. Number 3, my sister. I feel like when you are a little brother and you have like someone above you, like a sister or brother, that is like super ambitious and cultural, then it's always like a very strong driver. I remember when I was 8 and she was 12, you know, all the other kids, they would probably listen to Barbie Girl or something, but I would be listening to Nirvana and Pearl Jam. You know, like she was always like putting me in a situation where status quo was not enough. It had to be more. So it always had to be like more, you know, something, because I always compared myself to her and not to the ones I was around. And Sophie is, yeah, she's amazing. So I really, she influenced me a lot. And she is a perfectionist to an extent that, you know, I can't compare to. I think like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, like they're like super ambitious. Number 4 is, and it's like no one is more important, they're equally important. So it's like not 1, 2, 3, 4, but like number 4 is my wife, Caroline, because I met Caroline at a point in my life where I had opened Atelier September, and you know, I'm just like a boy from Copenhagen, you know, like I think that, you know, when you are from a small town, you know, like you're from a small town. But I met Caroline, and she's like very different to me. You know, she was 21, I was 30, and I was obviously older than her, but at that time she had like this, you know, crazy international career as a top model. And I think in a way, like she's so generous and playful and caring, but she also really opened up the world to me in a way that I could never have imagined. And I think she taught me that like I could go anywhere. And number 5, the most important, my kids. My kids, they taught me more than anyone else in the world could have taught me, because I think that, you know, I had my first child when I was 35, and you know, in some way I feel like I thought I had figured out the world. Like I was, I understood everything. I was under control. But then, you know, when I had kids, I realized that I understood nothing, and that I didn't even know myself. Like when you have your first child and you see them crawling for the first time, or eating for the first time, or laughing, you know, you actually understand that this is a part of yourself that you never saw. Like you were that little baby once, I was, you were, all of us were. And to re-experience it is like mind-blowing. And from that, then I think like it took away my ego completely. Obviously, I have ambitions and I have dreams, but I feel like when you are like a group of kids and parents, and you know, everything becomes different, and it becomes you realize the importance of playing and being present at the moment. They grow so quick. Like I feel like I just had my first little girl, but now she's 5 and she's going to school next year, and I'm like, it stresses me because I don't want to lose it. There is a lot of other stuff that is important. Some photographer, some painter. It's good all, but I think these is like the ones carving me to the person I am today. I think like every brand is sort of like a reaction to time. So let's try to talk about one of the places you didn't mention, which is the cafeteria at the National Gallery. This was a place that I was kind of like invited to propose a restaurant. And when you have the National Gallery in Denmark, this is the only art institution where all Danish people will go at least once in their life. So then I thought, when you can make a restaurant in a place where all Danish people will go, it's not only about my cooking, but it's also about what does this house represent. And by that, I knew that I had a potential to also speak on my own behalf, but also on the behalf of the government or the current government. And at that time, the government had a policy where they wanted to cut down the budget for the museum by 3% every year, which is an issue, because in this way, if you want to cut down cultural administration, in my point of view, you also lose a part of the common culture, like the wealth of a country, and it's difficult to recreate. So I felt like there was a need to do something generous, and therefore we proposed sort of like a cafeteria that was welcoming everyone. We could also have made a fine dining restaurant, but we made like a cafeteria where you would cook with local ingredients, organic ingredients, and suggest a kitchen that was friendly to everyone. Not only the cultivated people, but also the people that maybe would like to have a Coca-Cola and a burger. They didn't get the burger and the Coca-Cola, but they get something that, you know, kind of like would appreciate, they would appreciate, like a, whatever, like a nice bagel or a good croissant. So in some way trying to actually consider what is the political situation, what is the purpose of the place, what is the traffic, what is the space, the architecture look like, and then from there my idea is always to build it up. And I think with the National Gallery it was interesting because they proposed that I could collaborate with Jan Worm, this Vietnamese artist, and here we sort of like again also created a narrative of, in a house of art, we introduced design done by artists. So the place becomes a humble place with Insomari furniture, Isamu Noguchi, and a Danish fabric designer called Nana Digital. So these are the only objects. And the success is it actually works. It is like a democratic eating place, you know, like all democratic is wrong to say because what is that? But it is an open, friendly place. And I think it's an interesting thing because it adds a positive value to the museum and strengthens the position of the museum and the purpose they do. I feel like one of the key parameters of having success is also to be able to enjoy other people's success and never to compare your own performance with other people's performance. And I think for me, like very early in my life, you know, I realized that there is an element of learning, stealing, copying, and recreating that is so important in a creative process. So for me, you know, like when I travel, like for this time here, it has been very, very difficult to go and eat in Seoul. But I always go and I go to the Korean barbecue and I go to, you know, all the places and, you know, I look at, you know, how do they serve the food? How do they talk to the customers? You know, the grandmother in the grill and I think it's like you need to be open and you need to see everything. So for many years I've been very excited about Aesop for maybe 15 years. And I feel like Aesop is such a super interesting brand. The brand makes me, you know, until I experienced Aesop, I would never use any skincare products. It was not like, I was just like more rough. But then I think like with Aesop, you know, when you get like a oil and you're like, it's a little bit orange and you smell it and it's like and you're like, it's not only for women. I think skincare brands is very much for women, but then, you know, you and the shop, and I remember like every time I would go to Kyoto or Milan or something, I would be like, who made this shop? And I would be like, this is so interesting. And at the same time I would feel home because there's an element of like hominess, like you recognize the place immediately when you come there. The products, the style, the materials. You know, now I have 3 Atelier September, and I'm not interested in making like a big chain. Why? What is that? It has no purpose other than money. So I think like growing my little business of cafes, it has to be with purpose. It has to be with energy, and I think Aesop did that very good. So it's an inspiration and a feel-good place. Leadership is like a very complicated topic to talk about, especially in gastronomy. I think with Atelier September, where we are lucky is that we are a part of a transformation. So, first of all, when you have the good people, it's relatively easy to lead them, because good people also comes with sort of like an ambition to be a part of something and to grow something. I think like families or like communities, you know, everyone should be involved. Like if you're passive, you don't feel a part of the community. So my way of running a place is I have a hierarchy, but I also have an open structure. And everyone who wants to participate in this is actually the people that grows with me. So I don't, I don't have to own the narrative of everything I do. Like it's us, what we do. When I talk about Atelier September, I always say us or we. It's not me. So I think that I always ask myself, how would I like to work? When I go to work, I think I would like to do something super nice, have a good work day, make a beautiful product for the customers and for myself. But at the same time, I would also like to be a part of something you could call almost like a scientific process, where you say, we ask ourselves, was this good? Can we do it better? Could we do something fun? Could we invent something here that would be nice? Because this is also like you invent something, you see something new, you discover something. So I think this is how we run it. And in terms like so I try to give all my employees this feeling of participating. It's a question I think about a lot. I think about, there is this Japanese photographer called Sugimoto, that he takes this picture of the coast shore, and he says something. Everyone tries to go forward, but I try to go backwards. In a time, I have kids, in Denmark, you experience like the use of tablets, of screen, Netflix, television, Instagram, like our brain is just like exploding. So actually, I think what used to be conservative is contemporary. So actually, to move back in time. So for food, I think actually what is interesting right now, craft. To actually have a craft. What is craft? Maybe it's on cooking or doing something, but it's also a craft in terms of what is a restaurant. Like a restaurant used to be a house where people lived, and then they cooked for people and they took care of people. And if you came to me, I'd be like, hey, how are you today? Would you like to sit here? Would you like to eat something? And your presence was important. And I think the idea of returning to sort of like the core. I grew up my business with Instagram and social media, and I feel like now there's a new era coming where maybe Instagram is also changing to become such a commercial platform, but the reality is that a restaurant is only good when it's good. To just visit a brand is not good. Like Aesop is only good because it's good. When you're there, it is good. And I think like we have to be careful we don't just become brand operators, AI machines. I think if I should ask all, then I would say Korea, what's next? It's interesting. I'm excited about Korea. I'm excited about where the country is going. And I feel like so much to see and visit, and I would be interested to feel like, what do Korean people feel like? What do they think is next?